The Middle East is no stranger to conflict. This region has seen countless battles and wars over the centuries. For decades, this volatile region has been a crucible of geopolitical tension, with various factions vying for power and influence. Today, those tensions are once again reaching a boiling point, threatening to spill over into a larger conflict. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict continues to simmer, with no resolution in sight and both sides suffering. Iran's nuclear ambitions cast a long shadow over the region, raising fears of a potential arms race. And now, with the recent Hezbollah rocket attack, the situation has become even more precarious, adding fuel to the fire. The attack, which claimed the lives of innocent civilians, sent shockwaves through the international community, prompting calls for action. It was a stark reminder of the ever-present threat of violence in the region, a cycle that seems unending. For the United States, the attack posed a particular challenge, testing its foreign policy and strategic interests. It demanded a response, but what kind of response? Military action, diplomatic pressure, or something else entirely? President Joe Biden, a seasoned statesman with decades of foreign policy experience, found himself at a crossroads, weighing the options. The situation called for a steady hand, a measured approach that could de-escalate tensions without compromising security. But it also called for leadership, for a clear articulation of American interests and values, and a path forward. The eyes of the world were on Washington, watching to see how the Biden administration would navigate this latest crisis with bated breath. And within the White House, another pair of eyes were watching closely, those of Vice President Kamala Harris, ready to support and advise. The rocket attack, attributed to the Iran-backed Hezbollah militia in Lebanon, was not merely an isolated incident. It was a deliberate provocation, a calculated attempt to draw Israel into a wider conflict. Hezbollah, a powerful force with a history of targeting Israel, has long been a thorn in the side of the Jewish state. The attack, which killed Israeli children and teenagers, was met with outrage and condemnation from the international community. The United Nations Security Council called for an immediate ceasefire. World leaders condemned the violence and called for restraint. But for Israel, the attack was deeply personal. It was a painful reminder of the country's vulnerability, of the constant threat it faces from its enemies. The Israeli government vowed to respond forcefully, to defend its citizens and deter further attacks. The situation was a powder keg, and the fuse had been lit. The question now was whether the flames of conflict could be contained or whether they would engulf the entire region. Within the Biden administration, the attack on Israel sparked intense debate, revealing deep divisions among the president's closest advisors. Some advisors urged a cautious approach, fearing that a strong American response could escalate the situation and lead to unintended consequences. Others argued for a more forceful response, contending that failure to act decisively would only embolden Hezbollah and its Iranian backers, potentially leading to greater instability in the region. President Biden, known for his deliberative style, was caught in the middle, weighing the pros and cons of each approach. He was acutely aware of the need to avoid another costly entanglement in the Middle East, mindful of the lessons from past conflicts. But he was also keenly aware of America's long-standing commitment to Israel's security, a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy. Adding another layer of complexity to the situation was the role of Vice President Harris, who had her own perspectives on the matter. Harris, a relative newcomer to the world stage, had been tasked by Biden with handling a number of sensitive foreign policy portfolios, including the volatile Middle East. While Harris's aides insisted that she was fully aligned with the president's approach, rumors of tension between the two leaders began to surface, hinting at underlying disagreements. Some whispered that Harris, eager to establish her own foreign policy credentials and make her mark, favored a more hawkish stance than Biden, potentially setting the stage for future conflicts within the administration. As the crisis unfolded, Vice President Harris found herself thrust into the spotlight. She participated in high-level meetings with national security officials, poring over intelligence reports and discussing options. She fielded calls from world leaders, offering condolences and urging restraint. But Harris's role was not merely reactive. She also took the initiative, engaging in her own diplomacy. She spoke directly with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, expressing America's unwavering support for Israel's right to defend itself. And in a move that surprised some observers, Harris went a step further than Biden, publicly condemning Hezbollah's actions and calling for a swift and decisive response to the group's aggression. Her remarks, delivered with her trademark blend of empathy and resolve, were widely seen as a sign that she was not afraid to stake out her own ground on the world stage. Section 5. A voice of compassion. While Harris's strong stance against Hezbollah earned her praise from some quarters, it also drew criticism from others. Some accused her of being too quick to resort to military force, of ignoring the plight of innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. But Harris's supporters countered that her approach was not about warmongering, but about principled leadership. They pointed to her long record of advocating for human rights, both at home and abroad. They argued that she was uniquely positioned to understand the complexities of the conflict, having spent her career fighting for justice and equality. In her public statements, Harris was careful to strike a balance, condemning Hezbollah's actions while also expressing concern for the suffering of all civilians in the region. "We mourn the loss of innocent life," she said, "and we call for an end to the violence that has caused so much pain." Section 6. Echoes of elections past. As the crisis in the Middle East deepened, it became increasingly clear that it would have significant implications for American politics, affecting both domestic and international policies. With the 2024 presidential election less than a year away, both Democrats and Republicans were looking to capitalize on the situation, each party strategizing to turn the crisis to their advantage. For President Biden, the crisis presented both a challenge and an opportunity, a delicate balance between diplomacy and decisive action. On the one hand, he had to navigate a treacherous foreign policy landscape, one fraught with risk and uncertainty, where every decision could have far-reaching consequences. On the other hand, he had a chance to demonstrate his leadership on the world stage, to reassure Americans that he was the right person to keep the country safe and to solidify his legacy. For Vice President Harris, the stakes were even higher, as she was not only the Vice President but also the presumptive Democratic nominee. As the presumptive Democratic nominee, she was already facing intense scrutiny, with every move being analyzed by both supporters and critics. Her handling of the Middle East crisis would be seen as a test of her judgment, her temperament, and her ability to lead on the world stage, potentially shaping her political future. The situation drew inevitable comparisons to Al Gore's experience during the 2000 presidential election, a time of similar political tension. Gore, like Harris, served under a popular incumbent president and faced the challenge of stepping out of the shadow of his predecessor. But he also struggled to define himself as his own man, to escape the shadow of his predecessor, and to establish his own identity in the political arena. Section 7. A defining moment. The Middle East crisis presented Kamala Harris with a defining moment in her political career. It was a chance for her to show the world who she was and what she stood for. Would she be content to stand in Biden's shadow, or would she use this opportunity to carve out her own path? Harris's response to the crisis was closely watched by both her allies and her detractors. Her supporters argued that she had risen to the occasion, demonstrating the intelligence, compassion, and resolve that had made her a rising star in the Democratic Party. Her critics, however, charged that she had failed to provide the kind of steady leadership that the country needed in the time of crisis. They pointed to her sometimes wavering pronouncements and her perceived lack of experience on the world stage as evidence that she was not ready for the Oval Office. Section 8. The weight of legacy. As the crisis dragged on, it became clear that it would have a lasting impact on the legacies of both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. For Biden, the crisis was a test of his decades of foreign policy experience, a measure of his ability to navigate the complexities of the international system. For Harris, the crisis was a defining moment in her political career, a chance to prove herself on the world's biggest stage. How she handled the situation and how the American people judged her handling of it would likely have a profound impact on her political future. Section 9. A world watching. The eyes of the world were on Washington as the Biden administration grappled with the escalating crisis in the Middle East. From the halls of power in Europe to the streets of the Middle East, people watched and waited, eager to see how the United States would respond. The crisis had exposed the deep divisions within the international community, with some countries siding with Israel and others condemning its actions. It had also highlighted the limits of American power, as even the world's sole superpower struggled to contain the violence and broker a lasting peace. Section 10. The Future of Diplomacy. As the crisis in the Middle East entered its second week, there were no easy answers in sight. The path forward was fraught with risk, and the stakes could not have been higher. The decisions made by Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and other world leaders in the days and weeks to come would have profound consequences not only for the Middle East but for the entire world.